How do you manage Picea or spruce foliage? That's a good question. Question often asked and a question explored in this video, and in fact I'm going to follow this little forest for probably a year before I release this video. Now this forest is almost unrecognizable to what it looked like half a year ago. If you haven't seen the video, I will pop a link at the end of this one so you can watch how this became from basically a very unstyled forest. Anyway, it has recovered well, it is doing really well, it has survived spring, and now I need to look at this foliage. If I look at this side, this pad is quite full, but here on the other side the branches are really bare. So what I'm hoping for is to trigger some backbudding here on these empty branches. I want to keep the tops in check so that that doesn't get all the way overpowered, and basically give it an all over cleanup. Here there's another branch in the back that is quite weak with substantial foliage on the inside that just doesn't seem to take off. I'm going to handle that, and I'm going to show you over the season how this develops. Now normally in a tree you can define multiple zones of strength. Basically the top of a tree like this is the strongest, and then the lower branches of a tree are the weakest. Don't confuse this with the lower branches in the composition, because these are all individual trees. Here again, the top is the strongest and the lower branches are the weakest, although it doesn't look that way on this tree right now. So what this means is that you need to prune the top a lot heavier than the lower branches. And when do you do that? Well, it is now the first week of May and these branches have extended 1 to 2 inches. But this much. That is a time that you consider pruning a spruce. If you do it later in the year, you might not get such an optimal response. So you wait until this much of extension and then you look at the tree and you say, well, what am I going to prune? First of all, I mentioned here I have some weak branches on the inside, right? They are not doing all that well. So these are not being pruned at all. I leave those alone. It's also not bad if these get very long. At some point they might just take over the whole branch. Then if I look at other branches that are on the outside but on the lower branches, right? Here I would say, let's be conservative. I'm going to remove half of the growth that is on there right now. Now these are the 2 lowest branches of this tree. And here, as I said, I'm just going to take half of the growth of this year. And I can do it with my scissors, just like this. It is a little bit awkward. Or I can say I'm just going to take them between my fingers and then pull. In this case the needles are still very soft, so there is a bit of a risk that I'm damaging the needles too much by doing this. This is one of these inner shoots. It is a lot less strong than the outer shoots. I'm going to leave it in place. The same with these. These I'm going to reduce a little bit, take about half off. And this way what you will get, hopefully, is a new flush of growth within the next 3-4 weeks. And that flush of growth should come more from the inside of the tree, so that really aids in developing better ramification. Because the tree is now in maximum growth mode, removing all these growing tips really signals the tree, hey, something is wrong, you've been eaten, grow new branches on the inside. Safe, away from all these herbivores. Now this you can do throughout the tree, of course. And once again, it is not about where in the whole canopy of this composition is the branch. It is about where is the branch in the tree that you're looking at. This one is still in this lower part of the tree, so here also I'm just taking off about half of this growth. Here I've got a 3-way split and I'm taking one away. There's a branch here, there's no branch on this side, so I'm taking the one that interferes with the branch that I already have and then remove some of this. I am quite concerned that I'm really damaging needles now, but well, we'll see that in a couple of weeks. And with that, pretty much the pruning of this branch is done as well. Now here I'm getting into the upper ranges and I can start reducing more drastically, but still look for which are the branches that are on the inside, how strong are they, and leave some of it. Where the trees are quite healthy, I do expect a significant backbudding response here. Let's see whether this backbuds. And of course I should now, before I start fertilizing, try to remove some of this stuff. Don't know where it came from. Must have been in the pot when I got the tree last fall. Where did this come from? The reason why you have to remove this is because it just eats fertilizer and water, and it gets really unpredictable how the pot responds. Problem is that most of this it's not a moss, it is a tiny little plant that just, if you pull it out, you just get the roots in the soil sprouting again. But yeah, it is a must. It needs to come off. All ready to go back into the yard. And that brings me to, how do you care for a Picea bonsai? These trees, they like light, but they do not like the heat. They do not like the dry air, and they certainly do not like very hot, dry roots. So this sits actually in the grass. The pot is nice and overgrown, that's why it is so humid, and gets about 5-6 hours of direct sun in summer. And I just fertilize lightly with my generic fertilizer, nothing special, and I water when all the other trees are watered. They like to be humid, not soaking wet. Yeah, just moderately moist. Don't put it in the hot baking sun, and this tree will do quite well for you. It is therefore not very much like a pine. Pines do stand full sun and they can also handle hot pots. Picea, they cannot. They're much more like larch. 5 weeks have passed and a few things are noticeable. First of all, this top is ugly. That's better. But more importantly, you see that some of these buds that I said, well, they are weaker, have now extended a lot, and they are getting strong enough to actually start to compete with the rest of the tree. That's really, really positive. Now I saw one right here. I don't think I need it this strong, because there's a nice little bud there, so I'm just going to shorten this and remove it. And more importantly, all these cut ends, here you can see it very clearly, the buds are starting to push. So pruning back has indeed resulted in a big flush now 5 weeks later. So this tree is really starting to get to the point where I want it to be here. These have extended quite significantly. It's getting nice and strong. I'm going to leave these in place. I can prune them in winter back to buds that already are forming. In fact, I'm going to leave this alone for now completely, and later this year I might do a little bit of a cleanup. But I did want to show you, well, how this is responding, but also that the buds here now are forming. Well, instead of a couple of weeks, we're a couple of months later. It's August. Unfortunately, over spring I wasn't able to do all that much anymore. But what you can see, there's now a third push starting, and it's only starting in the top of these trees. This actually is not pushing at all. One of the things holding it back is of course all the weeds. I haven't been weeding all that much, so let me clean this up and then I'll get back to you. I think that looks a lot better now. In fact, I think I'm not going to do all that much. I'm just going to prune a little bit here in the top. I'm going to remove long runners that are starting to form, and the rest I'm going to leave alone, and I'm going to do the rest of the work over winter, because right now it is healthy. It is going to be quite warm the next couple of days. It does need a repot, because most of the oxalis I couldn't get out with the roots, and I just broke most of these plants off. So it will be back in a couple of weeks, and yeah, getting these roots out is much easier when you're repotting. But this on top I want to hold back, because I want the lower parts of this tree to still strengthen. These are the branches that I didn't cut in spring, and they have strengthened. In fall I want to wire it out, but this should therefore not be too thick. Now if we look like places like this right here, this is pushing and there's two nice fat buds just behind it, and I actually want to stimulate these buds. So I'm just going to cut back a little bit further so that these buds in the back are more stimulated. Here a very, very long branch, and it has small buds here already, so I don't want these to grow any stronger. Might just pop out the growing tip here. As said, it will need rewiring in winter. And then this tree is really on its way to have a nice little foresty bonsai feel. Nice old trees. You see still all these branches, they do want to veer back up, and this will have to remain wired for another couple of years. Spruces just are that way. They really, really want to go back up. So even if I now take all these wires off, all these branches, all these trunks, they'll become straight and they'll grow up again. And it really takes years for them to settle in. So it is a matter of just letting it grow, wire, prune, and yeah, develop. And guess what I didn't do over winter? Wire this one out. In fact, I haven't really been taking care of it all that well. So I need to clean this out, remove all the weeds, and then instead of wiring, I am not going to wire now because it's already at the start of the growing season. It is March, late March, and the buds are starting to swell. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to take my scissors and just prune away offending growth in the hope that that will already clean it up enough. Then maybe over summer I'll spend a little bit more time, but you know how it is, right, in March. It's just too much to be done. Look at all this moss growing up along the trunks. Right, that already looks a lot better. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to look for the places where there's multiple buds and then just remove the extension if there is sufficient growth, or remove the complete side branch, reduce it and bring it back to profile. This is going to reduce a little bit of the budding, but then again, this tree is now quite happy and healthy, so it can do with a little bit of pruning. Very clear buds there and there. This one has a clear bud, and there's this center branch that it can then just take out. Same here with this one, good buds, good buds. So this long extension is not completely needed and I can just clip it out. Then here at the bottom you see also nice thick buds. Nice thick bud. Actually this is also a three-way split. Taking this one out. And now it is still wired. I can bring this down a little bit so it is back in its own pad. Then I have to look at this one. Yes, this can also be removed because there's a bud there and there's a bud there. So I can go in the middle and remove it, and here reduce up to the bud. Is this still wired? There we go. And then we go here in the back. This is a very long branch that is also wired. It can be brought back a little bit again, just like this. And then prune it back here to this bud that sits here in the wood. And this long branch I'm going to remove completely. And here, this is one that comes from a junction. I can remove it completely. This one sits on top, but I don't need branches all that far in. And now this is all cleaned out. Position in the pad. Right. This is ground. Now, and although I didn't wire, I did clean up the pot. I removed the moss and I pruned all of these branches back. And I think it is now again in a state where you say this is a very light composition. These are slender trees. It doesn't do well to have a lot of foliage on it. In a couple of weeks the buds are going to open, and then this is going to be completely flush with young green growth. And yeah, I think it will look pretty good. It will need a rewiring at some point, and an unwiring actually, but for now this is pretty good. It really has this lightness that bonsai requires. Some openness, some slender, gentle, curving trees. Pretty pleased with it so far. Right, we're heading into April, and what I find very interesting to see is that this big tree is a lot slower to wake up than these smaller trees. Not sure why, but it is interesting. And now I'm just going to go through and do what I did last year. I'm going to sort out this growth. So here on top, for instance, there's a lot of growth and I don't want all this growth. So I'm just going to remove some of these side branches where I can. And then I'm going to look at the length of all these, well, basically candles, right? I'm just going to nip the candles out, and just like before, I'm going to reduce the top ones a lot more than the bottom ones. It's basically just the same as with all your other bonsai work. Channeling energy. Here I am reducing the energy on the top of the branches. Now last year I already said I want to get a little bit more backbudding in this tree, and actually it has happened. I have seen some backbudding, so now I can start pruning back some of these long branches, thinning them out again to avoid getting a lot of thick growth here in the top of the tree. Here again, quite a bit of backbudding. Don't need all this length here. And this is basically the way that you can manage a spruce forest. Keeping it light, removing intense growth, particularly in the top in spring. And if you have the feeling that you're not getting enough backbudding, then you just let the branches grow, extend for a little bit, and then in the middle of summer you prune them back. Now I don't want a lot of extension on this anymore. I don't want a lot of fattening on this because I like it as it is. But that means that I will have to be quite diligent in removing a lot of crotch growth, a lot of extension growth, and pruning back as soon as I get nice backbuds, removing some of the old growth in the process. Now I'm removing these growing tips with my fingers. I just find it works easier on this young fresh growth. If you're later, you really let this grow and extend a little bit, then you really need to use scissors. But that's also what you do when you want better backbudding. You just let it grow longer, stronger, heavier growth. But so far so good. This works. And of course, if your tree is sprouting differently at different times, you don't need to prune all the trees at the same time, right? You can just say I'm going to prune the heaviest growth. Look, this is why you need to pay attention when you're working on your tree and not just keep on talking, because here I actually clipped off a branch that I wanted to keep. What was I saying? I was saying that if one tree is a lot quicker to wake up than another, you don't need to prune the whole tree, the whole forest in one go. You can do one part of the forest today, and in a week or two, when the big tree for instance starts to push, do the rest of the pruning. So really think about whether your branch that you're pruning is at the right stage of pruning, or whether it is better to just let it grow. And if you're in a forest setting, not all the trees have to be in the same stage of development, so you might at some point, and pay particular attention to what's happening in the top of trees. Here I have one back bud, I've got another one here in the back, and I've got the top, and the top actually comes from these two branches, so I don't need all that. I already removed the growing tip here. Here I'm going to remove also the middle branch and tip the growing tips, because the top of each tree is, of course, as mentioned before, a lot stronger than the bottom, so we really need to thin this out. This is also where most of the budding takes place. Here another one of those multi-splits, which actually, yeah, I'm going to remove this one as well, clean it all up, clean it out, and here's a three-way split. I'm just removing the center line, and then it is back in shape again here. 1, 2, 3. This one is weak. This is extending too much, this is extending too much, and these two are also weak, so I leave those alone. And in the lower branch, of course, you see the same pattern. Here I removed the middle one last year, then 2 branches grew here, 2 branches grew here, and it is starting to get quite full, but I can still keep them. But these are much stronger than these little ones. These little ones, I'm just removing a few needles if I can actually get it. Come here. Yeah, now I removed too much. That's why you should use scissors. Here lower, you also see this is really, really strong. So removing quite substantial amount, but it is still a lower branch. Here you see the side branch, it is actually not budded out, so I can clip that off. Then here something comes up, and that's actually from down below. It hasn't been wired. Just going to reduce it in length because there's 2 buds. Just going to keep one. And now with just a few cuts, the whole forest is ready for spring again, except for this tree and this tree. These 2 still need to start pushing. I think it is starting to come together quite nicely. First weeds are coming up. That's a bit of an issue, but besides that, quite happy. So I've given it 2 weeks. You can now see the other trees have caught up, and now I can do the same thing here, clean that out, and then it's ready again to go into the garden for the rest of summer. In fall I'm going to have to completely rewire, but for now the wire can stay on. Let me just clean this out, and then I guess I'm almost done with this video. So there's a little bit of downward growth here. Let's remove that as well. But besides that, here I might as well just pluck the tips. I'm not going to do all that much work. There's a tiny little risk that if you do this too early, like I'm doing now, that you don't get a lot of growth here at the tips, but you get backbudding on the branches itself. But we'll see how this works out for this year. And then next year I can adjust if this doesn't respond as I want it now. And I'll report back later on if I do get problems. But here I'm just removing the tips, making sure they don't grow out, they don't fatten up. For best backbudding, of course, it is best to let them grow longer, then cut back. But I don't want these to get any fatter, so I'm a bit of a dilemma. I hope that by giving it lots of sun, lots of fertilizer, I do get the same amount of backbudding over time. All done, ready to go back into the garden and grow for the rest of summer. Now, this has not been a major transformation. If you do like a major transformation, I have a 2-part video on transforming a Christmas tree into a cascade bonsai, and part 1 you can find right there. And of course, if you're in general just curious what I post, my latest video is right there. This was Jelle, growing bonsai. See you next time.